Welcome to the Women at the Top author interview series today. My name is Regina Barr and I'm the founder of the Women at the Top Network, and I'm going to be your host today. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Women at the Top Network, we are a community of like-minded women who have a goal, simply put, to help aspiring women to lead. And we do that in a couple of ways. We help to implement training, implement connections, and also provide information for you to be successful. Joining me today is Brenda Abdilla, author of Outsmarting Crazytown, a business novel about how derailed professionals can get back on track. And I think this is a very timely book. But before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Brenda. Brenda is a respected and sought-after career and leadership coach. She works with corporate leaders who want more effective strategies for team accountability and collaboration, and with professionals who are navigating a change in their high-level careers. More than 90% of Brenda's coaching clients get promoted, and they land the role they desire or address their core issues within 12 months of working with Brenda. Outsmarting Crazytown is Brenda's second career-centric book, and it hit the Amazon bestseller list for new releases in career. She's also the author of What's Your Lane? Career Clarity for Moms Who Want to Work a Little, a Lot, or Not at All. And I think for some of the moms on the call, that probably sounds like a good read for them as well. Brenda also serves as the professionals facilitator for two Denver-based women presidents organizations. So with that, I want to welcome you to our call today, Brenda.
Thank you so much, Regina. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm a huge fan of your podcast. So
well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I just want to show folks what the book looked like. I do have it here. And for those of you who've been on our podcast before, you probably know I have a standard answer. So Brenda, I'm going to give you my standard question, excuse me, not an answer, although I have lots of answers too. So, but my standard question is, I always like to hear the backstory on a book. And I have to tell you, having read the book, I feel like it's very timely. Given a lot of what we're going through, although it wasn't written when we were going through this pandemic and a lot of the changes we're going through. So tell us a little bit about why it was important for you to write this book, Outsmarting Crazytown, and a little bit about how a derailed professional could get back on track.
Well, it was mostly the stories that I hear in my work as an executive and career coach, whether I'm working for a person who's seated in their career and their company has hired me to work with them, or they privately hire me because they want to change, I hear the most astounding stories. And from an ethical perspective as a coach, I couldn't go home to my family and say, oh my God, what did I hear today? Because that would be completely inappropriate. So in my mind, I just started calling it Crazytown. And eventually, I got the idea to turn it into a story because I think that so many in corporate America and abroad can really relate. I don't blame the companies. I don't think that it's malintent on the part of the companies. You know, it's a complicated world. It is not our parents' work environment. Like, there's nothing comparable. And just some of the insane things that were happening, like a client got promoted to a VP level. And I'll give all female examples, even though I have male clients too. But she got promoted, a Fortune 100 company at the VP level. And then her boss literally shut her out of all meetings. She was not included in key decisions. And it wasn't just her gender, because other women had a seat at the table at the VP level, but for some reason, and the boss wouldn't discuss it with her. And so it was just massively frustrating, but very unique to her. To me, that is Crazytown.
Yeah, and to have worked so hard to get the promotion and thinking that, okay, this is my ticket in, and then to get that blocking, and from the person you would think would support you the most, right? Your boss.
And for no apparent reason.
Yeah. Well, so I want to talk a little bit about the format of this book, because it is different than your typical what I would say more clinical type of textbookish career type of book. And so I'm just curious to know, why did you choose the novel format for this kind of book for professional development instead of doing a more traditional type of career book?
Yeah. Well, so my 2013 book, What's Your Lane, is a typical professional development or self-help book, right? It has a concept, it has tips, it has strategies, it has, you know, charts and graphs and that kind of thing. I love that. I am an avid reader. I read about 15 of those professional development books per year. And so that's what I sat down to write. But the problem is that people are so busy. And my clients have the best intentions, but they have families, they're fatigued, they have huge careers, and they don't have time to read some 400-page book about, you know, making a life less complicated, right? That doesn't make sense.
It's already complicated.
Exactly. So I put it in a parable form or allegory. That genre is extremely popular thanks to Patrick Lencioni, who wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Teen and Death by Meeting. I recommend all of his books. And yeah, and it just allows the reader to put themselves in this case, it's Mike's story. He's the main character of my book. And they can enjoy Mike's story, but also glean information for themselves without having to kind of trudge through a big self-help book.
Right. You know, well, I'll just have to tell you because I, you know, do a lot of work with men and women in leadership roles at the executive level, and, you know, different strokes for different folks, right? Different people learn in different ways. And so I was reading it and I couldn't help but think of my husband, who is a very technical engineer. He's not necessarily, you know, into reading. He'll read every technical manual you throw at him, but he's not always interested in reading the technical business book. But he might read something like this. And so it's, when I'm done with this, I was going to ask him if he wanted to take a look at it. And I'm just curious to see if it's something that resonates with him, because he will read something occasionally, like he's read The Good to Great and, you know, that kind of thing. So occasionally he'll do it, but he's not typically excited about reading a business book. So I'm going to test it out on him and see how it goes. So.
And it was very purposeful that my main character is male, because women will read generally and glean information from a male character. They're fine either way, but men might not be as into it if it's a female character. And I love my female clients, and I treasure my male clients as well, because oftentimes I am literally the only person they're talking to about their career troubles or their unhappiness. And so,
and it does, they feel very isolated. So sometimes women think that they're very isolated, and often they are. And it's because of numbers, you know, maybe there's no other women in the role, but men too, because they're not as relational sometimes as women. We women kind of will get together with our little posse and have those dialogues and help each other. So
we do not suffer in silence generally.
Right.
Yes, we have our own unique challenges with our gender for sure.
So I want to talk about, because well, I do want to say something about the character. He is married with children and has real life things, a wife with a career, and things that could happen to any one of us or our spouses. So I like that aspect of it too. So it's not a one-dimensional character. It's someone who lives in the real world like all of us do.
Yeah. And you know, most of us are good people. My clients are good people with good intentions, with amazingly high skill. And yet these things, mergers and acquisitions or whatever, happen.
Exactly. And very stressful environments. And so I want to talk about working in a toxic environment, because you know, anytime that you deal with it, it's difficult. And I would say if you're in that environment right now, it's twice as hard. And being remote doesn't make it easier. I think it makes it worse. And sometimes people feel like the only way out is to look for a new job. And that may or may not be the best move, particularly right now with the environment that we're in. So what would be your words of advice for someone who finds themselves in a toxic environment and thinking that, gosh, this is my only option, I gotta go?
Absolutely. And yeah, COVID has made it worse in a number of ways, the remote thing, especially if you have a family at home. Now it's double, although there are lots of silver linings. But the first thing, if you are in a toxic environment and it's starting to impact your sleep and you are stressed and your spouse is saying you have got to do something, right? Because you complain about work all the time or this is impossible. Hands down, the first thing is you have got to get a handle on your stress. It amazes me that we as a culture somehow think we can have these huge jobs with oftentimes family and then parental responsibilities with our aging parents and all of the complexities of today's society and the pressure, and not have a regular major routine for dealing with our stress. And so that means, and that's like 911 kind of prescription kind of dealing with stress. Because if you're in a high level job, you've been putting your health off for projects, and then one project leads to another, or your company's been acquired and you have to prove yourself to the new team, or everybody that works for you is 20 years younger than you, and you feel, all the complexities. And then we give up our health and our routine. So because stress has such a huge triggering effect on the brain, you can't really make a decision about leaving in that state. You're going to bring all that cloud with you. And so unless and until you are working out regularly, possibly seeing a therapist or a coach, clean up your diet, kind of get your foundations together, then you can make a clean and clear decision. You can be strategic. Sometimes it's just your boss. And if you're clear-minded and strategic and you've got the reins, you could apply to another department, or you could decide to wait it out, or you could end up doing a search, which is, not as easy as it used to be.
Right. Well, I chuckled when you were saying about making a decision on when you're under stress. I immediately thought of, do you remember the image from This Is Your Brain on Drugs and the frying egg? And I thought that's kind of like your brain on stress, right? It's just you're fried, and that's not the best time to try to be doing that. So, you mentioned earlier that, you don't blame these kinds of issues necessarily on the company or the boss. People don't typically have malintent when they're working with people. They're caught up in their own world, which is what I always try to tell people. Put yourself in their shoes for a moment and take a step back. But we all have blind spots, and the character in the book discovers his with the help of a mentor. So what are some of the blind spots, just a couple that you normally see that people have that they can't see for themselves?
Yes. Well, one thing on the companies and malintent, companies generally do not have malintent. Occasionally people do. And so I know we'll talk later about that, but sometimes you have to figure out, is this person really after me, or is this person an equal opportunity control freak or whatever?
Right.
So,
that's a good point.
But that also made me forget your main question.
So what are some of the most common blind spots that you see in people? No worries.
Well, the fun kind of funny part of my work is that almost all of us think we have a blind spot that is holding us back, and it's actually something else. And this is true. Thus the term blind spot. So frequently I'll hear something with my clients where they'll say, well, they only promote people with an MBA, and I don't have an MBA. I only have a bachelor's degree. And so I'm never going to go anywhere in this company because they're obsessed with education and the MBA. But I also work within that organization, and I oftentimes have inside information, and I know for a fact that that's not true, but the person has terrible communication skills, or they're not collaborative, or they hoard information. We all have our little quirks, And sometimes those quirks we can be blind to that. So one of the first things I do with my clients to help them figure out their blind spot, like 90% of us, our blind spot is in communication, right? We're either a little bit aggressive or we're a little bit passive. And whatever the case, we're not getting our point across. You know, we send 10-page emails or emails that are one line that are perceived as rude because we never say please and thank you. So almost always our blind spots are in the realm of communication. And then then the other 10% are just quirks that people are not aware of.
Yeah, and we all have our quirks. So yeah. I always tell people.
Not me, of course.
Of course not. So, you know, we're talking about like toxic environment. We're talking about the current environment and, you know, unprecedented change. You know, I have a client who has been working from home since March, and her company just announced that they will not be going back to the office until June of next year. Yeah. And then even with that, they will probably be doing hybrid type of work. And she's a person who really likes going into the office. Yeah. So when you think about the current corporate environment, you know, what do you think some of the issues are now, and is there hope for change?
Yeah. And, you know, along with your client, a lot of my clients are hearing the same thing, like, don't come back. Don't even, you know, we're not coming back in 2021 even. So one of the first things I tell my clients is, okay, it's time. Now you were having a makeshift office, but it's time to get real about your home office. And even depending upon your level and of course your income, even consider a shared workspace where you can rent a private office so that you can go to an office if it's too hard. You know, some of my clients are in New York. They're doing a meeting and their spouse is 2 feet away from them because they're in small space. So you have to really get serious and realize that your environment matters, right? And you
not
can't
only
have
for the people on the other side, but for yourself.
Oh, I'm talking exclusively for yourself. Yes. You know, we kind of all cobbled together our COVID situation, but it's going to be a while. And for some companies, it could be forever.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you something funny. I work from home predominantly, unless I'm working on site of the client. And I have a very old dog. Some of the folks on the line probably are familiar with that. So she has trouble getting up and down. And my home office is on the 2nd level. So I will literally only go upstairs once a day with her because she physically has to be semi-carried. Yeah. So for today, I'm in my dinette, but I have a process. Like half a day I work upstairs, half a day I work down here. So my husband starts working from home and he wasn't aware of the process. And then he like sees my stuff out on the dinette counter. And then I said, oh, okay, are you going to work here? Because then, you know, you're going to need to monitor the dog. Like, in other words, don't go down to the basement because she'll start crying and I'm upstairs working. Oh, he's like, oh, I didn't realize that. So he's like, I'll go downstairs. Yeah. So he went to the lower level and set up down there because he didn't want to have to deal with the dog, right? Like he wanted to be able to, and I was like, okay, but just let me know, you know, you're welcome to work up here, but we just need to work it out. But I just cracked up, right? Because he just
a whole different world
came in and took over. And I was like, let's have a conversation about that. So.
Let's have an onboarding conversation for working in this house.
Yeah, maybe you have to go get that outside office, you know, that you're referencing you. So.
Well, some of my clients, let's say, work for law firms where the employees are not back, but the partners get to go in, and they're going in because that's how they can focus.
Yeah.
And I have an office.
Teams and systems and, you know, like I need to work in my office sometimes because I have access to things. If it's something I can do, I try to bundle things so that I'm leveraging my time. Yeah. And you know what, quite frankly, I have a different kind of focus when I'm in my office and have access to the things that I need, my files, and I have a dual monitor screen, which makes certain activities more efficient. So
that's another example of something that is a couple $100 that's worth the investment because now you're home. If you've been bending your neck and looking on Zoom at your laptop for the last 6 months,
Right.
that's not a sustainable plan. And so if you need, what I would say about that for your client is, if you need special equipment, see if you can get the company to pay for it. If they're saying we're not coming back until June or at all in 2021. And, you know, we have to admit to ourselves that we can't have what we want.
Right.
There are those of us who really miss being in person.
Right.
And right now we can't have it.
Right. You're absolutely right. So I want to talk a little bit about the situation that you kind of referred to before, that sometimes there are people who may have you in their line of sight for creating trouble for you. So if you do have a boss that falls into that category and you think is maniacal, you know, trying to push you out or trying to prevent you from having a seat at the table, what's the most important thing that someone should do in that particular situation?
So the first thing is you have to become an investigator and see if you can trigger the behavior yourself, because you have to kind of validate it. You know, even Mike in the book thought that his boss was after him, but then he found out some other information that changed his whole perspective. But so you have to kind of validate your suspicions. And that's not done by just saying, do you think Bob hates me? You know, you have to validate it. So for example, I had another client who every time she spoke up in a meeting, her boss spoke over her. And this actually was a Sex and the City episode with Miranda and one of the partners. But this happens in real life. And so she tested the situation, and sure enough, I mean, it was so evident that everybody else knew it as well, except for, of course, the partner that was doing it. And so first you have to see if you can trigger it. Then I take my clients through kind of just a process that you can do yourself of what is going on in the mind of this person that is pushing me out, right? In her case, we just assumed, because we don't have information, that he was very intimidated by her. He didn't like her. He didn't like how smart she was. I have another client who was very obviously being pushed out of a company, and it looked like ageism. It felt like ageism. She was 50 in the marketing world, and they were into the whole younger team. So because she kind of got a grip on herself and she was able to name it, she was able to be more strategic about it. So at one particular juncture, the HR person and her boss proposed to her that she leave, that they would let her go, and that she would get a little buyout. And she said, I need to think about it. And then she didn't follow up with them. And a few days later, they asked, and she said, no, thanks. And she was able to stay there for a year. Now, not a pleasant atmosphere, because they did not want her there, and they made that clear. She was able to stay there a year while she found another post while they were paying her. And she did end up suing for gender discrimination. And it's been about 2 years and it's still going. So, you know, it seems easy to just say, well, you should just quit and sue, but it's not that simple. No, and I bet she wishes she hadn't sued, but I know she was glad that she took their money for a year.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
This is it. This is not normally what I would recommend, but she was being summarily pushed out of the organization, so.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I do see some of that ageism, and I also see the gender discrimination. So like you said, you know, every person has to figure out how they want to navigate that, and, you know, whether that's the hill they want to die on or whatever, because those things, to pursue those avenues, take a lot of time and energy. And sometimes I just tell people, is it really worth it, you know, to spend that time and energy when you could be putting that towards something else that is more fulfilling and something you have a passion, because to your point, 2 years is quite a long time. So let's say,
men too. It's not, but they don't talk about it generally, except in a coaching relationship. But, they deal with some of the same thing. But it's important to figure out, is it only me? Am I being targeted? Or is this person a control freak who, for example, listens to your phone calls? That was a real thing. Wants to edit your emails, even though you're at the vice president level and your new boss wants to review your emails that you send out to your team. That's crazy town.
Yes. Well, it's interesting that you said that, because it's like sometimes we feel like it's only about us. And then to your point, find out if he's doing that with everyone, because sometimes they share the love with everyone. Exactly. And sometimes that's enough to help you just feel better about it. Like, oh, okay, it's not just me. So if you've tried everything to stay in your current position when you know that you are in crazy town, but it's not working, and you want to leave and find a new job, what would you suggest would be like a first next step in that situation?
Yeah. So, obviously secretly put your resume together. I think it's really important to adjust your expectations. And this was true before COVID, and now it's doubly true. You should not expect to hear back. Like, that is the most painful thing that my clients go through, is they will say, I have 20 years of experience. I have a PhD. I received 11 awards in my field, and nobody is getting back to me. And they make all kinds of assumptions about how this reflects on their marketability. It doesn't. It's just how it is. Companies don't get back, or they get back with an automated, we're taking a pass on you. And so what I tell my clients, even though it sounds silly and simplistic, you're not going to hear from anybody until you do, and then you will. Right? So that's an important thing for people to, especially most professionals have never had to look for a job, or have just been recruited or promoted, and now they're actively putting themselves on the market. That's a different, it's a different level of humility that's required. And then spend some real time figuring out what you want. One of the biggest mistakes we can make out there in the marketplace, especially with our network, is to say, well, I'm thinking about this, or maybe going back to school, or maybe start my own business. That is not how you activate your network. You want to save that network for when you are crystal clear about what your plan is. And that takes time and effort and, soul searching and all of that.
Well, I always tell people it's like having a second full-time job. So you have to go in it with that mindset, and it does take time and energy. So you have to, so going back to what you said earlier, you have to make sure that you're eating properly, sleeping, managing your stress, hopefully getting some exercise. And I don't care if that's just a power walk for 10 minutes on your lunch hours. So we are winding down on our time together today. And I, obviously always ask folks for a last piece of advice. So in addition to reading your book, what would be one important piece of advice that you would offer people, particularly as it relates to working in Crazy Town?
Well, I would say get in the driver's seat of your career. Don't have a career by default. Figure out what your skill set is, or what I call your superpower, and see how you can leverage that. Maybe you do need a little extra certification, or a new conference that you attend. Get yourself in the driver's seat so that you can really leverage all your experience. Your career should be paying you back. It should be something that you are very intentional about.
Great. Well, I want to say thank you, Brenda, for being here with us today. For those that are listening, that concludes our interview with Brenda Abdilla, author of Outsmarting Crazytown. And just a reminder, if you'd like to learn more about Brenda, her book, her programs, you can do that at Momentum?
It's a very old URL.
Managementmomentum.net. Okay, I just realized that. I was like, okay, wait a minute. I'm not saying this right. Managementmomentum.net. And so again, thanks for being here. And for those of you who would like to join us again, please check out our website, reginabarr.com, for next month's topic. And I want to just say thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.